Aaron, we're back. How you doing?
Good. Been a long morning.
But yeah, we've been doing a bunch of stuff today.
A lot of new stuff for me.
So I'm trying to keep the energy up. So as we come through here with all the stuff we put together, so as people are listening to this and are going through, they'll recognize we filmed this all within a couple of days. Or a lot of what they're seeing in a couple of days, and there's a lot going on.
A lot.
So if people hear gunfire going on in the background, that's Hepner and Jake outside. Hepner and Jake Labhart, in case there's confusion there. Outside.
Two Jakes, too confusing.
And two just grown children. That's what they are out there right now. They're out there laughing and giggling, shooting around on the range. I want to talk, and we talked about this, like, should we even talk about this? Like, is this something that we need to talk about? Because we promised what we wouldn't do was, number one, dumb anything down or treat anybody like they were dumb. Two, treat anybody like they were dumb. But I think this is a topic worth covering for a couple of reasons, and we can go through those reasons. But that is the whole concept of what are foundational movements when we're talking about exercise programming, specifically human performance. So maybe we break that down a little bit. Where do you want to start?
Shoot, we'll just talk about how we're just going to educate. Like, if somebody wants to take our stuff and run with the program and hop on anything like that, that's awesome. We would love that. That's our purpose. We want to serve. But if they want to do it on their own, they feel like confident that they can do it. Maybe they have a master's in exercise science or some sort of certification. They just want to improve, just like pulling, like we've talked about in previous podcasts, of pulling from a subject matter expert or something like that. This is ultimately the intention of all these episodes and all the topics we're talking about.
So they can draw some lines and some conclusions to what maybe they're currently doing, maybe what they should be doing, what they should be doing less of, and then ultimately, if they need help with that, like, to be here as a resource. And obviously, we have some things to be able to provide for them. But on the foundational movement side, there are some basic things I think people understand, but I don't ever like to try to make too many assumptions about stuff. And so when I think foundational movements, I think people cross over, like, what's a movement versus an exercise.
Right. Yep.
So like, you're, and that's what they end up prescribing or linking to or searching for in a program. It's like, okay, what exercises am I doing? Versus from, like, you or my perspective, if I'm thinking about a program, I'm thinking about what are the right movement patterns this person needs to do.
Movement patterns is a great topic for that, or a great word for it.
Yeah. So then it means, like, I have to, and that's going to be rooted in a foundational movement, right? And then I pick the most appropriate exercise for that person. Scale
up, scale down, regress, progress, whatever.
So we can go through the movement patterns, I think, and then we can talk about exercises, right? And how people link to them, maybe give them a different way to look at it. But I think those are some of the bigger differences you find in exercise programming. So again, the term exercise is linked with programming there, but I think it gets linked there, or people get lost in that. Like, they're looking for specific exercises, and they question why some are not there, and they're probably not doing that quite enough, actually. Right, and they expect others they're absolutely going to be in there. And I think that's okay, but at the same time, like, you could be missing some major pieces. So maybe we talk a little bit about foundational movements and how we thought about putting those things in to our programming, depending on which program you happen to get in. So, I mean, people know squatting, hinging, lunging, pushing, pulling, rotating, extending.
Yeah, those are our basic movement patterns that we're going to have in the program. You're going to squat to some variation. You're going to hinge to some variation, whether it be heavier or more accessory movement. You're going to do an upper pull and upper horizontal pull. So you have the movement planes of up and down. So horizontal push-pull, vertical push and pull, and then there's their trunk training. So most people say core or abs. Since we are a performance-focused company, we're going to talk about the trunk. So that is anywhere from your upper abs to your quads, or to your knees, really, because there's so much involved with stability, anti-rotation, rotation, producing power. It's the connector from your feet to your upper body.
It's the thing that, where the link in the chain, if you're trying to express all the strength and the power, and, that you have, and all the muscle that you built and all that stuff, like, if there's breakdown there, then you are going to not be able to perform or express that at the most, again, I'm challenged with the word, but like the most optimal level.
Yeah. Optimal is a funny word to play with. It's like you get into the biohacker kind of thing with optimizing things, or it's just ultimately just readiness. There's two kinds of sides.
I agree. And again, it gets lost. And also it's like, why are we spending so much time talking about this word? let's just get away from it and go back to the movement pattern. So like, again, connecting movement patterns with exercises, and specifically like what movement patterns should people be doing? You mentioned like you're going to hinge, you're going to deadlift, right?
Yep. Deadlift, RDL, good morning, any variation of deadlift.
Right.
We can kind of throw like the Olympic lifts in there. It's just a little lower weight, higher velocity with it.
Yeah, so they're going to see a lot of complexity in terms of the exercise selection that we've made to fulfill the movement or movement pattern.
Yep.
We know people need to do both just on a general fitness level, but also the things they may need to be spending more time in or away from, for that matter, based on, you know, their job duty or kind of the things that they're doing in life, you know, in general. So like when we talk about law enforcement specifically, there are things that they're doing a lot of and things that they probably should be doing more of. And that's the careful thought process in going into the programming. One of the things I wanted to talk about is like the mistakes you see people making with just very basic stuff. Like, okay, it's a squat. Well, squat is a squat is a squat. Well, not really, not all the time. What are some of the bigger mistakes you see people making when doing the exercise program? And then is there anything like you see with regard to exercise programming in general that you think, you know, could use some improvement? You can start wherever you want with that.
Yeah. So a lot of it is there's picking exercises that aren't amplifying what you're doing. So like an Olympic lifter picking a Zercher squat may help to some degree versus like getting very specific in the Olympic lift of like a power clean. So they need to work on that front rack. So what should they choose? Front squat. But with law enforcement, there's not an opportunity to specify too much into a particular lift set. So there should be a good rotating variety, and you get your consistency by doing it in a rhythmic rotation. So similar to conjugate training or West Side.
Talk about that. Talk about like what overview conjugate training.
So how West Side does it is they go through, I believe it's 6 lifts for a 6-week cycle. And so they'll do something like back squat, front squat, Zercher squat, just throwing out random examples. Is obviously I'm not in their system, so I don't know what they're doing. Box squat, goblet squat, and then maybe like a change speed squat or something. And they rotate through those. And so they find like a 1RM or something, and they work from that heavy piece, and they try to best it the next time they come through. So we've kind of taken a little bit of that concept to provide that stimulus, because law enforcement can't train. They're training year round. There's no off season. There's no perfect system to
peaking, tapering.
Exactly. Yeah. Peaking, tapering, ramping up, and like getting really, really good at those lifts. You got to keep them stimulated. And so conjugate seems to be what I've found to be very stimulating for somebody to keep them going, keep them interested, and always finding a way to improve something. And so we just rotate the lifts. Sometimes it's just 2 back and forth. It could be back squat, front squat, depending on like the cycle we're in and the overall objective. But ultimately, she's trying to keep buy-in the whole time so that they feel ready to perform at any moment's notice.
Yeah, I think so. You just mentioned a whole list of different types of squats, right? I mean, it goes on and on and on. And where should somebody start? How many different exercises should be in a program, and where does that fit in? I think for the beginner, you know, maybe you have 4 to 8 exercises that you're practicing regularly because there's skills that you should be getting good at. And there's probably less complexity that needs to go into your workout program as a newbie or somebody that's been out of it for a while. Let's keep it simple, right? And be able to get the result from the thing that we're doing versus always trying to change it up and be fancy with it. As opposed to the person that's been in this for a long time, that's more seasoned, who is, and I've used this example before on another podcast, but like the person that's trying to improve their squat, because we're using that as an example, from 200 to 300 pounds, right? That's a significant amount of weight, but that program is going to look a hell of a lot different than the guy that's trying to get his squat from 500 to 600 pounds.
Yeah.
Way different, because you've got a different type of athlete, different training age. There are different things that go into that. So that level of complexity that goes into that programming gets much, much deeper. But if what you're trying to do is maintain, right, and maintain readiness and maintain performance and maybe even improve it a little bit, like to think that you have to have this massive library of exercises, you're overcomplicating it. It doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I see with those fundamental movements is again, you're, without dumbing this down too much, like people overloading shitty movement patterns.
Yeah.
Right? It does sound like, oh yeah, it's a back squat. Yeah, but what does your back squat look like?
Exactly. Yeah, and that was another point going back to things I see is, overloading bad movement patterns. Somebody could pick a different movement pattern that could be more optimal for their limb length. So this year alone, or really end of last year, I started doing a low bar rack for my back squat. I have a little bit shorter upper body, longer legs. It seems I was against it because I was big into Olympic lifting, and you high barred everything.
Right.
And so when I switched it, my weights significantly went up, and it felt way better on my body. I wasn't fighting against myself. And so I think finding those little nuances that work, what works best for you, is a key to that readiness.
Yeah, it's so important. Like not marrying yourself to one thing. And again, remembering like, what is the goal here? If the goal is, strength, power, speed, capacity, maintaining it all the time, marrying yourself to one thing is probably most definitely going to take away from something else. There may be something better for you or best for you based on your circumstance, but marrying yourself to something and not at the same time getting emotional because number one, you're not good at it, or number two, it's not in your program enough for your satisfaction. That does not really a lot of logic. And I see people struggling with that.
They're just not. A lot of people just don't look at the bigger picture, that 10,000 foot view of what's the movement patterns I'm getting. You are squatting. You just may not be doing the one that you really, really like or think you like because whatever reason the coach programs.
Right. So you're just doing what's there, right? With no questioning or fundamental understanding of where you currently are, right? So you mentioned like I'm exploring, or I've started exploring this, this whole low bar back squat thing. Okay. So that takes time, which means what? Generally speaking, you're having to maybe take a little load off the bar to practice the fundamental foundational movement pattern of the squat, just using the modality a little bit differently than you were using before. So you have to get out of your head when you're coming into one of these programs, like, okay, maybe I have to take a little weight off the bar, right? In this pattern.
It's a little ego drop.
In this particular exercise, but don't think about it as the exercise, right? And being married to that. Think about it as the movement pattern. And we want to master this and get better at this. And I would love to be able to be good at all of them, right? But the bottom line is I don't have to master all of them. I need to master the pattern of squatting or pushing or hinging. And then when you throw these other things in there, you know how to make the adjustments to, okay, this feels different. My center of gravity is different because I've moved, moved the bar up or down or forward or backwards or whatever the case or wherever I am in this thing. So I think that's the stuff that people probably should understand about foundational movement patterns is like, think about it as that. Right? Don't think about it as your exercise. And if there's a coach that's putting just exercises into a program without helping somebody get better with the foundational movement pattern or thinking about that, that's a red flag for me. And I see it's one of the frustrating things for me kind of looking back. I'm not saying it's a bad program. I'm saying, hey, is this giving the user the flexibility and freedom, but also the education to understand how they can make that exercise work best for them. And if it's not, for whatever the reasons are, there's some type of a limitation. Maybe there's an orthopedic limitation, a soft tissue limitation, or just flat out like, I don't have the skill to do this. Have you given them a pathway to do something else or get something else in?
And a lot of that comes from communication. If there's having that open line of communication between the athlete and the coach of being able to, hey, I can't do this. This is the reason. And if they can provide a reason of instead of just, I don't like it, then that is an opportunity to create adjustments. So one example I have is one of our most compliant athletes we have.
Love that word.
Yeah. He's probably 90% over the last 5 years of all the workouts. Yeah. He had 1 or 2 weeks where he's off just because of sickness or he just worn himself out. But he is a hard charger. And he's one of those I have to tell whoa versus like giddy up all the time. And he's got some knee issues that are they're orthopedic. Like we cannot fix it. And whatever he needs to go get surgery, is he gonna? I don't know. We can only recommend things. But front squats hurt him. And I program front squats regularly. So we made an adjustment. We talked, hey, back squat, maybe even box front squats will be what you need to do. And so anytime he sees it pop up on the program, he knows, hey, I got to switch this out. And that just came from communication. Yeah,
that's an easy thing to do if the coach has made that a priority or the group of coaches has made that a priority, like we're making it for our for our consumer or our athletes, if you will. Maybe we just leave it at this. It's interesting, like the front squat is not a movement pattern.
Nope.
It's an exercise.
It's an exercise.
To challenge a movement pattern.
Yep.
And so maybe if people if they take anything away from this, talk that we're doing, is that try and think more about like, what movement am I supposed to be doing? And then choose the best exercise for you, and or trust or understand that we've done the best we can when programming for the masses to choose the best things based on what we know you're probably dealing with or could be dealing with in the future. And also know that if there's an issue, you have something, you can always reach out to us.
Always reach out.
And we can help you work through the challenges as a team.
Yep.